My crazy ex-boyfriend stole all my money, then disappeared. So I tracked him down and did the same exact thing to him. He went insane in the aftermath and got himself imprisoned. When I first met my boyfriend, Ken, I opened up to him about my past relationship. I told him that the man I was with was abusive, and Ken responded by telling me he would take care of me. Not even 2 weeks in, he was sending flowers to my workplace. We quickly began dating, but unlike most sociopaths, Ken didn't flip the switch when we got together. Instead, he was the perfect boyfriend for an entire year. I thought I was going to marry him, but I woke up one day to him missing and all of his stuff gone. I called, but he wouldn't respond. I started going through drawers, hoping to find something, but I noticed some valuables, my watch, my earrings, and even a couple $100 cash in my wallet. What's much worse is when I logged into my bank account, I saw that he had cleared all of it out too. Every dime out of the $100,000 I had in savings was gone. Because I was quite dumb at the time and living above my means, I failed to pay rent for the next 3 months. I was evicted and left homeless. The weeks that followed were a blur. I couldn't eat or sleep, and my phone was constantly blowing up with calls from debt collectors. It was humiliating. I'd gone from having everything, love, a stable life, and finances on point to having absolutely nothing. My family couldn't believe what had happened, and I didn't even want to explain it. It was too embarrassing. Living out of my car wasn't sustainable. I'd park in different places each night to avoid attention, but it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. I still had a few belongings crammed into the back seat, but every day it seemed like I was losing more, whether it was my dignity, my hope, or another bill that went unpaid. Eventually, I realized that I couldn't handle this on my own and called Kayla. Kayla had been my best friend for years, college, and we drifted apart after we started working, but the bond was still tight whenever we met up for lunch. When she found out what happened, she didn't hesitate. She immediately offered me a place to stay. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to be a burden, but Kayla wouldn't take no for an answer. "You're moving in with me. End of discussion," she said, crossed her arms, and gave me a look that said she meant business. I didn't have much choice, so I packed up what little I had and moved into her spare bedroom. It wasn't much, but it was a hell of a lot better than sleeping in my car the first night. I cried myself to sleep out of sheer relief. I was beyond grateful that someone still cared about me after everything I had been through. For a while, I stayed at Kayla's. I applied for jobs and worked on getting my finances back in order. But no matter how hard I worked, one thought kept gnawing at me. Ken was out there living his life with my money, probably laughing about how he had fooled me so easily. The rage I felt was overwhelming. I wasn't the type to let things go easily, and the more I thought about it, the more determined I became to track him down. I knew it was crazy, and I debated whether I should have just let it go, moved on, and rebuilt my life. But I couldn't. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. It was a stretch. I didn't have much money left, but I scraped together what I could and hired a PI to track Ken down. It worked out. I was also starting to get paid from the coffee shop job that I applied to recently. I needed to know where he was, what he was doing, and if there was any chance of getting my money back. After a few weeks of staying at Kayla's, I started to feel a bit of guilt settle in. As much as she said I didn't need to worry about paying rent, it didn't sit right with me. She was my best friend, and I wasn't about to take advantage of her kindness. One morning over coffee, I told her that I would start paying her rent, and she refused to take it since I was her best friend. I told her it would make me feel like I had a bit more control over my life, and would find a way to pay her every month, so she allowed it that way. Turned out to be opening another credit card. I had sworn off credit after what happened with Ken, but it felt like my only option between rent and funding the private investigator to track down Ken. The costs were piling up, and it wasn't like I could ask my parents for help. They already thought I was reckless for getting into this mess in the first place. I stared at my phone screen for a good 20 minutes before finally pressing submit on the credit card application. I knew that it would be worth it. I'd get my money back once I tracked him down. Once I had everything he stole from me, I could pay off Kayla, pay off the PI, and clear all these credit card balances. It was temporary, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Temporary or not. Seeing the charges rack up made my stomach turn. The PI wasn't cheap, and I'd set aside a good chunk of that new credit limit just to pay him. Each week I got another update, another clue as to where Ken was hiding. Kayla noticed I'd been more tense lately. One night, as we were watching TV, she casually asked if I was okay, because I seemed stressed. I didn't want to worry her with the details and told her I was fine. Just trying to balance everything she said. If it was about the PI, she told me not to go through with that and that I shouldn't have to go broke over this. That was true. I did run it by Kayla and didn't tell her that I went through with the PI, and I felt bad for it at first, but I had to. Once this was all over, I'd have my money back and I'd pay her every cent I owed. I just needed a little more time. Kayla raised an eyebrow, but she didn't push it further. I was already in too deep, and I had to believe this would all work out in the end. The PI worked fast. Within 2 weeks, he had tracked Ken to another city. He was living under a different name, using fake documents, and of course, still living off the money he had stolen from me. Seeing pictures of Ken ignited a fire in me. I wasn't going to let him get away with it, but I needed help. That's when I thought of Sarah. Sarah was someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. We used to be close, but over the years we had drifted apart too. I knew her in college, but she had never been to school. We hung in the same friend groups, and if there was one thing to know about Sarah, it was that she was trouble and always had been. She thrived on chaos and drama, but was also incredibly smart with it. I knew that if anyone could help me get back at Ken, it was her. I reached out to Sarah, explained what had happened, and told her my plan. I didn't really know what to expect from Sarah. It had been years since we last talked, and the last time we met, she was getting into trouble that bordered on dangerous. But that's exactly why I thought of her. Sarah always knew how to navigate chaos as if it were her second nature. And I needed someone like that by my side now, someone who not only understood the dirty game Ken played, but also knew how to beat him. I grabbed my phone, hesitated, and typed a message explaining briefly what had happened and that I needed her help. It didn't take more than a few minutes for her reply to arrive. "Meet me at the bar on the corner in an hour. We have a lot to talk about." My heart raced. What was I about to do? Part of me still hesitated, but the other part, the bigger one hungry for justice, pushed me forward. I put on my coat, took a deep breath, and left the house. Kayla was at work, so I didn't need to explain anything. Maybe it was for the best, because she would surely try to talk me out of it. The bar was half empty when I walked in. In the corner, a woman with a piercing gaze and an enigmatic smile waved at me. It was Sarah, as full of energy as I remembered. When I approached, she raised an eyebrow, her gaze already filled with ulterior motives. "So, Ken stole from you, and you want to get even, right?" she said, skipping the formalities. I nodded and sat down. "I want him to pay for everything. He destroyed my life." Sarah leaned in, her eyes gleaming with that dangerous mix of empathy and excitement. "You came to the right person, darling. We'll make it happen. But first, you need to be ready. This won't be easy, and more importantly, it won't be legal."
My throat went dry.
Legalities were the last thing on my mind. After everything Ken had done, any hesitation I might have had was quickly evaporating. "I'm ready," I said, trying to sound confident. Sarah gave a sly smile. "Perfect. The first thing we need to do is turn the tables. He used fake documents, right? And he's living under the radar?"
"Yeah."
The PI showed me pictures of him. He's in another city with a different name.
"Great."
So the first step is to make him feel the same thing you felt when you realized you lost everything. We're going to make him doubt everything around him, even his own safety. "How do we do that?" I asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and fear. Sarah's smile turned mischievous as she began to outline her plan. The first stage was simple but brutal. Mess with Ken's mind. The PI had already gathered information about where he was living, but Sarah had contacts who could go further. She knew hackers, people who could break into bank accounts, security systems, and even alter credit histories. The idea was to make Ken believe he was being watched, that his money was disappearing, and that his fake identity was compromised. Little by little, we would tear down the life he had built with what he stole from me. "We'll start small," Sarah explained. "He'll notice minor changes, a purchase he doesn't remember making, a random debit showing up. And then, when he starts to realize something's wrong, we'll ramp it up. Over the next few weeks, we followed Sarah's plan to the letter. It was like watching a plot unfold, only this time, I was in control. Ken started getting calls from banks, questioning suspicious transactions. Strange purchases began appearing on his statement, and he became paranoid. I knew because, with the PI's help and Sarah's contacts, I was monitoring his every move. Watching his life unravel was a bitter pleasure, but I knew it still wasn't enough. That's when Sarah suggested something bolder. What if you went to him? My stomach churned. Me? Face to face. She nodded. No direct contact at first. Just enough for him to know you're nearby, that you didn't disappear like he thought. It'll be a mental blow. He needs to feel like you're a shadow trailing him. I was terrified by the idea, but I knew Sarah was right. It was the next logical step. So, I prepared myself. With the PI's help, I temporarily moved to the city where Ken was living. I rented a small apartment from where I could observe him and began following him from a distance, always staying in the shadows. I spent days just watching, waiting for the right moment to make my move. One night, I went to the bar he frequented and sat in the darkest corner. Ken was with friends, laughing as if nothing had ever happened. The rage inside me surged back with full force. When he went to the bathroom, I followed him without him noticing. And there, in the narrow hallway, as he washed his hands, I appeared. When Ken saw me through the mirror, his expression of shock was almost comical. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at him, letting the fear settle in. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. I left before he could react, knowing that at that moment, I had planted the seed of terror. Ken began acting erratically after that. He canceled outings, changed his routine, and even tried to move to a new apartment, but it didn't matter. Every time he thought he was safe, there I was, appearing from a distance, just enough for him to know I was close. With each sighting, he grew more paranoid, and it only fueled me more. The final phase of Sarah's plan involved something even darker, destroying what little stability Ken had left. That's when we took steps that forced Ken to make a fatal mistake. His paranoia led him to try and transfer large sums of money using fraudulent schemes, and it didn't take long for the authorities to catch up with him. When the police arrested him, everything he had built crumbled like a house of cards. I was there, across the street, when Ken was handcuffed. He saw me, and his eyes, filled with despair, searched for some explanation. But all he found was my satisfied smile. At that moment, I knew I had won. After Ken's arrest, I thought the battle was finally over. He was in jail, his life in shambles, and I had achieved some form of justice. But it didn't take long for things to take another turn. A month after his arrest, I received a formal letter from a law firm. Ken was suing me. The claim? Invasion of privacy, harassment, and even emotional distress. The most absurd part? He was trying to make it look like I was the villain in the story. As I read that letter, my blood boiled. It felt like the system itself was mocking me. Ken had destroyed my life, stolen everything I had, and now he wanted to make me pay for his own downfall? My anger only grew with each passing day. I talked to Sarah about it, and she, as always, was ready for the fight. If he thinks he's going to bring you down again, he's got another thing coming. We'll fight this and we'll win. I hired a good lawyer with a little money I had saved, and we began preparing our defense. The strategy was simple: flip the narrative and show that Ken was not the victim, but the predator. The first court hearing was tense. Ken showed up in court wearing what I imagined was his remorseful man disguise. He looked downcast, as if trying to convince everyone he was a wronged man. His lawyer presented their case passionately, claiming that my actions were a campaign of terror against Ken, that I had stalked and ruined his life. They even tried to downplay the theft, arguing that there wasn't enough evidence to prove he had stolen all of my money. On the other hand, I was determined not to be manipulated again. I took a deep breath as my lawyer presented the evidence. All the bank transfers, the fake documents, the private investigator's reports, and, of course, the devastating impact Ken had on my life. In court, I had the chance to tell my story. I talked about what Ken had done, the time I spent homeless, the suffering he caused me. My lawyer argued that all my actions were a desperate attempt to reclaim what was rightfully mine and that the real victim in this story was me. The evidence was undeniable. After months of back and forth in court, the ruling finally came in. I won the case. The judge not only dismissed Ken's claims but also ordered him to pay a hefty fine for all the trouble he caused, an amount that, added to what he already owed me, started to change my life. In addition, the judge issued a restraining order against Ken, forbidding him from any direct or indirect contact with me. Now, he was required to stay away, and any attempt to violate the order would result in even more severe consequences. The relief I felt was indescribable. For the first time, I was truly free from Ken. With the money I received from the settlement, I started planning what to do next. During the legal process, I had shared part of my story online, in forums and on social media, to warn other women about the kind of person Ken was and the dangers he posed. The response was overwhelming. My story resonated with many people, and soon I was receiving messages of support from all over the world, from women who had been through similar situations and from people who wanted to see justice served. That's when I had an idea, to turn my experience into something positive and productive. With the money I received, I invested in myself, taking courses and training, and began creating online content, sharing my journey of recovery. I detailed how I had been deceived, how I had risen up, and how I fought to get my life back. My social media following quickly grew, and before I knew it, I was being invited to speak at events and conferences about financial recovery, abusive relationships, and resilience. Over time, I turned those speaking engagements into a solid career. I started a consulting company, helping women rebuild their lives after difficult situations, whether financially or emotionally. Today, I make far more than the $100,000 Ken stole from me. In fact, the money he took now seems small compared to what I've achieved on my own. Not only did I recover, but I also became an inspiration for others. My name started to appear in magazines, blogs, and even on television shows, always telling the story of how I turned the tables. More than ever, I felt that I had something valuable to offer the world. Not just my revenge story, but a message of hope. The most ironic part? What Ken tried to take from me ended up being the catalyst for me finding a much bigger purpose in life. He tried to destroy me, but I rose from the ashes, stronger than I ever imagined. While he continues to face legal and financial troubles, I'm here, living a life he could never have predicted. And today, in my speeches, I always end with the same phrase. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you is what leads to your greatest triumph. That phrase has become my motto, a constant reminder that no matter how hard life tries to knock us down, we can rise up and achieve far more than what was taken from us.